Welcome to the lesson on functions. In this lesson, we're going to cover what are functions. We're going to talk about void functions, value returning functions, defining and calling a function, and designing a program to use functions. So what is a function? A function is a group of statements that perform a specific task. And the nice and really cool part about functions is you can write those specific tasks in a block of code, and that's going to divide larger tasks into smaller tasks. And the cool thing about that is that you can make the code simpler because you have your smaller functions that you can simply call. It also can be reused anytime you want to reuse in a program. You can have better testing whenever you have that, and then teamwork. So typically when you work as a programmer and you have teamwork, you're going to have different people working on different functions, and then they can put it all together to work as one big program. Void functions are simply functions that execute and terminate, or in other words, they start and stop. First type of the function that you're going to learn how to write is going to be a void function. A value returning function doesn't just start and stop. It starts with, it executes or starts, and then it returns a value back to that statement that called it. So one example might be an input function. So I said earlier that you could create functions and then just call them whenever you like, so you can reuse them as well. So the code for a function is called the function definition. And what you do is you write a statement to execute the function calling a function. Basically, there are function names, and you cannot use any keywords, you cannot use any spaces. The first character can be a little a through z, a capital A through z, or an underscore. Once you've put the first character in your name, then you can use, either a through z small, capital A through z, numbers 0 through 9, or another underscore. Uppercase and lowercase characters are distinct, and that means that if you name it with a capital anywhere in there, whenever you get ready to call that function, you have to make sure to include that capital. You have to spell it exactly the same way. If you don't include the capital, it's going to think it's a different function and it's not going to call it. Kind of similar to where our variables are. We want to use a variable, then we have to call that variable and we use it, okay? Same thing with a function. Just use it, call it when you need it. Make sure that you spell it in such a way that it's not going to have an error. So it's important to understand no keywords. Print is one of the first keywords we learned. Do not use the word print. So how do we actually write that function? Well, first of all, we have to write a function definition. Remember when we have defined the message right there? Remember when we have that pound sign? We use a pound sign for comments, which means that the interpreter is going to completely ignore that entire line. And those comments are there so that we can know what that function is for. It helps us. So we're going to create a function that defines the message, and here we go. So we have our pound sign, and we have our note, so we know what this function is going to be for. DEF. We must have that. That is defining the name of our function. So DEF message, we must have the parentheses afterwards, we must have the colon afterwards, or this will not work. Remember, we have to follow those syntax rules. When you create a function, it always has to be this way. Def message parentheses colon. Now the code block that we're using in the message function is just a couple of print statements, really easy. Print, I am king of the nerds. Print, hear me roar. So later on in the program, we want to call that function so that it prints I am the king of the nerds, and it prints hear me roar. So how we call the message is just simply the name of the function, which is message, and parentheses after. That's all you have to do, and you can reuse that code anytime you like. Logic is incredibly important when you're designing a program. If you're thinking about logic, like what is logic? What is she talking about? Well, when you get up in the morning, what's the first thing that happens? Is it maybe your alarm goes off? If you're a person that gets up to an alarm every morning and you forget to turn your alarm on the night before, then your alarm's not going to go off, and chances are you might not wake up and you'll be late for work. And so when I say logical, I mean we have to put it in logical order of how it has to happen. Otherwise, we can have not a syntax error, but a logic error. And a logic error is more difficult to fix than a syntax error, because a syntax error is, did you put a colon in the right place, or did you put parentheses in the right place? Did you misspell it? That's a syntax error. A logic error is, maybe you forgot to turn on the alarm, and so you have an error because you didn't wake up the next morning. We have to think about those very steps, each and every single step, and we have to put them in logical order. So one way to design that program might be a top-down design. We have our main program, and then we have our function. In our main program, we always have start and end in a flow chart. We have put, I have a message for you. And then we call the message, and then we say put goodbye. And in the message, it says, in the put, that just means it's output. So it says, I am the king of the nerds, hear me roar. So the program's going to start, it's going to print, I have a message for you. And the message will be, I am the king of the nerds, hear me roar, goodbye. This is a simple example. It doesn't mean that you're going to have any errors because they're all just print. The biggest error, logic error that you would have with something like this would simply be, hear me roar, I'm the king of the nerds, and maybe that's not the order that you wanted them to print in. But if you have calculations and you mess up the order or the flow of those calculations and you put things in the wrong logical order, your calculations won't come out correctly. Listen, if you're writing a paycheck program for employees are going to get really upset if their paycheck isn't done correctly. So it's very, very important to put things in logical order. It's also important to make sure that especially your math comes out correctly, because if it doesn't come out correctly, then it's wrong. Another way that you could figure out your logic might be even a hierarchy chart. My personal favorite is flowcharts. I love flowcharts because you know where the start is, you know where the stop is, you know whether it's input, whether it's processing, whether it's output based on what symbol that you're using. Or is it even a decision? A decision is a diamond shape. So you're always going to know just by a simple glance whether, what is it? Input, output, processing, decision, what is it? Hierarchy chart, main, that's going to show your main thing. You've got a message under that. I have a message for you, goodbye. They're all on the same line. You have to understand that it's going to go from left to right and then down. So, to me, a flow chart is better. Not a lot of people use hierarchy charts, but sometimes, some people prefer them, so it's up to you. But personally, I like the flow charts. So in this section, we covered what are functions. We talked about void functions very, very lightly, and then we talked about value returning functions, defining and calling a function, and designing a program to use functions. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next section.